Okay, so first, before we get started, I'd like to introduce trustees that are here. Maybe you can just introduce yourself.
Trustee Mike Roach. Trustee Jared White.
And Trustee Rye is online, so.
Trustee Pete Rye online.
Okay, so first, I just want to acknowledge that we are located on the traditional territory of the Samath and Matsqui First Nations, and we respect the long-standing relationship we have with our First Nation communities and continue to work in a spirit of harmony to advance the understanding and improve the education for all students. This is a fairly easy boundary review. Here's the agenda for tonight. We're going to walk through some demographic information, which is student information, projected enrollments, things like that. Talk about the proposed boundary changes and a little bit about our process. We'll have questions at the end if people have questions. Throughout the presentation, if somebody wants to ask a question and you're online, you can just put it in the chat. Tracy, you'll monitor that? So you can put a question in the chat if you have something, and we'll monitor that throughout the presentation. If you're in the room, we'll use the old-fashioned method of just waving your hand and you can ask a question. We'll stop at any time. So there are two areas for consideration. One is on the east side of the district in the Cooper Meadows development area, and one is on the west side of the district in around the Highstreet area. And we'll get into a little bit more detail about both these reviews right now. Before we do, I'll just want to create the context for doing a boundary review. So it's outlined in Board Policy 18. It's also part of the School Act that requires that boards are required to establish school catchment areas. But the considerations that the board makes when looking at boundaries, and you'll notice that we don't do very many boundary reviews because they're long-term kind of things, and they're not just things that you happen to change year by year, because it has lots of impacts on families and students whenever you do make boundary adjustments. So they're based on some long-term planning, and the board will be working on its long-range facilities plan early in the new year. So January, February, we'll be looking at the updated student demographic information and using that to look at, are there any future boundary adjustments that may be required? What does our capital plan look like for the next 10 years going forward? So what items are we putting into the capital plan? What are areas, looking at things like land acquisition and those kind of things are all part of the board's work in long-range facility planning. But in terms of catchment areas, these are some of the considerations that the board looks at. So minimizing future boundary adjustments. So we try not to make them very often because they're long-term. We try to minimize walking distances and safety hazards. So and use natural barriers where they exist. So when there's a mountain or there's a freeway or some major landmarks that help define boundaries, we use those as just sort of common sense in a lot of ways. And we try to balance the school enrollment and capacity, and sometimes that's difficult because you have growth in some areas, and it's we've resisted over time making internal boundary changes where enrollments have fluctuated. There was a time that Abbey Seniors enrollment was not increasing and was well below where it is right now, and you can address sometimes enrollment by changing boundaries, but that has when I said boundaries are long-term things, it creates a lot of disruption in a system when you start doing those kind of things. So you just kind of work on, when in that idea of balancing the enrollment and capacity of a school, you address it through other means often. You don't address it usually through a boundary review. So you'll see even in tonight's information that in some places there's continued pressures in some schools, despite the boundary adding some small pressures to those sites. But again, it goes back to some of the other issues of well, if we don't put the boundary there, then are we going to be busing more students? Are we going to be doing those kind of things when we maybe have some natural walking paths to school and those kind of things? So it is something that there are a number of factors that need to be considered when planning school boundaries. So the first one we'll talk about is the elementary boundary around the Cooper Farm, and that affects the Stennerson and the Prince Charles catchments. And I've just given you a map here, and all of these maps and staff reports are available on our engagement portal. So if you go there, you'll find all of that information. You'll also find this PowerPoint, sometime this week loaded up as well. So I've defined on here what the area for consideration is, and it's this parcel of land here. And the plan around this parcel of land, and our manager of capital planning works with the city pretty close on developments and what is that development going to look like. And so in the phase 1 development of this, the Cooper Farm area, there's 190 townhomes, and you can see that there's all kinds of different types of housing units that are intended to be built in that area. So when we look at all of that information, we have student housing yields that we estimate how many students are coming from that. So from all of those homes, townhomes, detached homes, row houses, whatever the case might be, we think there's around 150 students that are going to be generated from that. And that's based on the demographic software that we use that historically and looks at what are the yield rates in different types of housing units. And over time, we do change that. So one of the things that we've started to see, and when we look at how many students are generated from a detached home versus a townhouse. Townhouses used to be a very small number, and detached homes were 1.2, and that we started to see a decrease in the detached homes and an increase in the number of students per townhome. So it's often a factor of 1.2, and I know you can't have 1.2 kids, but that's how we do it. So that's where we get that 150 from, and obviously it's an estimate. So this is what the proposed boundary change does in this area. For elementary, it moves the boundary line that you can see sort of is on the west side of the street, running down McMillan Road. It moves it right down the middle of the street so that any houses that are built fronting McMillan Road on the west side of McMillan Road would be now in the Margaret Stennerson catchment. So it moves the line a number of feet over onto the road, and at this point affects no current people in that catchment. So you can see the difference between the proposed line and the current boundary line. So when you look at the current capacities and enrollments of those schools, you can see Prince Charles has a capacity of 332. It won't get to that capacity till in our estimates around 2032 when the McKee development starts to yield students for us. So it does start to pick up in the coming years, and it's always dependent upon the pace of development. The Stennerson catchment has got currently a capacity of just over 300, and it's going to have a capacity of 505 after the current capital projects complete, which is in addition to that site, and then we will remain within the capacity of the school with the enrollment. The middle secondary obviously has the same review area. The boundary is different for middle and secondary in terms of the Stennerson and Prince Charles and the catchment below, which is the Fraser Yale catchment. You can see the boundary for the secondary school cuts through part of the Stennerson catchment. So part of the Stennerson catchment goes to Claiborne, part of the Stennerson catchment goes to Fraser, and then the adjoining high schools, if you will. So the proposal in this case is to move the boundary line so that the Cooper development would be solely contained within the Fraser Yale catchment. And when you look back at these are 1 kilometer or 1.2 kilometer circles around the school sites. It does fit pretty easy into the Fraser Yale catchment, and also the traffic patterns to that school blend easily. So you can see the boundary line in this case runs down the west side of McMillan Road through the current Cooper Farm development. And really the boundary line can be any place there. When that was a farm, we could run the boundary line anywhere because there was nobody living there, so it didn't really matter where the actual line was. But now the intention is to move that so that the boundary would be fully contained in the Fraser Yale catchment. And that's the only change. Again, in this case, there are no current residents affected by the shift in that boundary. So just looking at the capacity and current enrollments of both of those middle schools, you can see they're both over capacity and will remain over capacity for the foreseeable future. We do have Fraser on our capital plan for an addition. So that's something that's in the works at some point. And Yale is currently operating at capacity, but is forecast to continue to move up over capacity in the coming years. And there's still some room at Bateman Secondary for additional enrollment. I will point out that these enrollments are headcount enrollments, not full-time equivalence enrollments. So we get funded based on FTE, but when we do this work, we base it on student headcount. So it's a different calculation. So then when you see the numbers here, it's like I say, it's based on the student headcount, not necessarily the FTE. So any questions on that one, on the east side boundary change? Yeah.
I've got one. I just wanted to ensure that the projected enrollment includes then the new development, of course, and is that a phased kind of like the time
Yes.
frame for that? We've sort of taken into account
Yeah.
what speed it would be developed at.
Yeah, we've made some estimates on, especially in phase one, we have a better idea in phase one of what that's going to look like. So yeah.
Okay, great.
Just the last boundary line shift in the Cooper Farm for the secondary school, it makes perfect sense not to go to Yale because Yale is
Right there, it's way closer.
But given the fact that the other school is under capacity, was that considered possibly just putting the whole Cooper Farm area to Bateman rather than Yale?
Yeah, again, I think that part of the consideration is when you look at that, if you took away all of the geography, and when you look at it on this nice flat map, it's a nice flat map, and there's no geography and no barriers and you look at the roadways getting to some of the other sites, it just made more sense that they can almost see Yale Secondary and Fraser from where they live, and it just made more sense for them to walk down McMillan Road to school.
There's an online question
Okay.
from Emily Casper.
Okay, you have to ask it because I can't see it.
Hi. Regarding the elementary catchment for Stenerson, so I was like, your proposed numbers, can you pull up that slide for the proposed numbers by chance for elementary? Yeah, so our, like, where we say 2023 and our capacity and actual enrollment, like, we are at 485 already. Actually, I think we're at 490 at Stenerson. And so even with the addition coming, I don't like, it's for us as parents, like, we're concerned that we're going to outgrow that so quickly already. Right? Like, is there a plan for that? Because I know we're adding an addition, but I think initially the addition in some of our heads was in order to remove the 4 portables that we have. But it sounds like those will be staying and that we're going to just continue to grow and then outgrow the new space very quickly.
Yeah, so the one thing is, so when you see the capacity lines on these graphs, they do not include any portables. So they are just school capacity. That is the ministry capacity of the actual building that was built. So they don't include portables.
Okay.
So right in the immediate term, you can see the enrollment's pretty steady at Stennerson.
Yeah.
And barring significant fluctuations in French immersion, we think that the addition should be able to accommodate those students for the foreseeable future.
Okay.
But
And
again, I mean, we've seen changes go both ways where enrollments have increased beyond the expectations, and we have general idea. I mean, the factors that we use to look at areas in a community that are built out already, that where we look at factors like retention rates and those kind of things within a certain catchment, those can change over time, and that's why we look at our long range facilities plan annually to find if there's some anomalies to the data that we use. We find for the most part those small fluctuations generally over time become are small fluctuations. So we may see a bump up a little bit higher than we had projected, but we also see the same bumps that go down sometimes. So
okay. My one other concern, that I know this is all about Cooper Meadows and not any other developments. I have heard from people that developers are buying up all of the houses directly in front of Margaret Stennerson, and that will become a townhome complex. And so knowing that a bunch of those houses have already been purchased by one particular developer, that also concerns parents when we know that will also bump numbers, and those will obviously be Stennerson kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that has nothing to do with the Cooper Meadows. It's just that, again, feels like a big addition. And we struggle.
So we try to stay, we try to stay on top of those things with the city. So when there's a development application that goes in to turn, those 3 houses or 4 houses on the street into a, 200 unit townhome, we work with the city to make sure we stay on top of those so that we can factor that into some of this as well. So.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Where was I?
I think, would it be fair to say that we have overlaid on these graphs our usual demographic calculations already, right? Just as other developments happen.
Right. So we know that the catchments that have growth over time, and you look back at Stennerson's catchment, for example, we factored in the typical growth patterns that we've seen, and it's based on a long period of time. And the enrollment, if you look back at Stennerson, has been generally fairly constant. Now it is forecast to increase a bit, but within that, what we've got now is, and that's how we were able to get the size of an addition at the school, was based on here's what our forecast for this enrollment was. Even at that time, we were somewhat anticipating some development at the Cooper Farm property, because we needed to be a number of years ahead of that application when we were going to the ministry, because once the ministry decides that it's an 8-room addition, it's an 8-room addition, and you're kind of done. And if it was another issue came up, like, oh, there's a big development that we missed, then you're kind of too late. So we were kind of in the background anticipating some growth in enrollment at Stennerson to begin with, to be able to justify the increase in capacity.
That's a fair comment, right? That often happens where developers will buy detached houses and then do a development, kind of like they did on the extension of George Ferguson that goes up the hill there.
Yeah.
I think that's the same developer. So I guess, you know, the takeaway might be that we should continue to work with the city to anticipate those things.
Yeah. Well, and just to follow up on that, so barring there being immigration and some of the rates of participation in different schools or the retention rates within some catchments would actually be decreasing potentially without some infill development and some immigration factors that might come into play in some of these different areas. And it depends, that is subject to different areas of the city for sure. But there was always some, general decline if we take out some of those other factors, right? You had a question?
Just along the same lines there. I have been at Centerson for 9 years. This is my last year there, but I live right there, 4-minute walk to the school. And the houses on my street, since I've lived there, there's been about 5 of them that have been renovated or completely torn down and rebuilt. So it's like a little old house that has 1 person or 2 people in it. And now it's a 6,000 square foot house that has 3 families living in it with 6 kids. And the area is definitely changing. I work right there as well. And I know people who know, that corner of MO and Old Claiborne is, there's a land consolidation happening there for sure.
Yeah.
Whether it's been applied to the city or not. But like Emily said, we are at 400 and in September it was 485. Just last week, we were told there was 3 new families, immigrant families that joined Centerson. The capacity of 505 in 2024 is, and adding, what did it say, 74 elementary age kids? With Cooper Farms, it's going to be above capacity before the Cooper Farm development is ever done. Based on what I've seen.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I've seen that happen so many times where even when you build a brand new school and it opens on day 1 over capacity. It's not surprising. And one of the things that's hard to factor in is that immigration piece. What's immigration looking like? How many, the province has a general idea of how many families are moving from outside of British Columbia into British Columbia. They then can extrapolate how many students that is. Our question is how many are moving to Abbotsford? Like when you look in places like Surrey and Langley and Burnaby, where they've had growth of, Burnaby had an increase of 1,200 students in 1 year, and was scrambling to buy portables because oh my God, where did all these kids come from? But I'm hopeful that, and you don't want to use hope as one of your planning tools. But if we ever had a situation that we had 1,000 students move to Abbotsford next year, or we're running at across the district almost 100% capacity at all of our schools to begin with. So we're really full, and it would be, you've got some places, Prince Charles has a little room to put in, but then you start looking at other schools where there's 6 portables on the site and those kind of things. So
I know Stannerson has been busing kids to other schools for many years.
Yeah.
They've had handfuls of kids that they send to Swift, I think, is where they go. So has there been any consideration as to maybe splitting that development? That's only phase 1 too, right?
Yeah.
There's phase 2 that'll be townhomes as well.
Well, again, I think that part of the board's work is when they look at that long range facility plan, is the board will spend a lot of time looking at this information, the demographics, looking at the trends, and then some of the options around what's the development look like. So it takes a long time. I would say the board has in the past spent days looking at the demographic data to understand different areas of the community in terms of what if should we be doing this area? How do we, in some cases, it's been about how do we build enrollment back into a school? How do you deal with, and we've had a number of sites that have had portables for 20 years. And we're in the place of starting to replace portables because they're getting old and it's time to replace some of them. But some students have gone to school in portables. The government's trying to move students out of portables, but our need in Abbotsford, when there's growth that we see versus growth in Surrey and closer to Vancouver, where they could build 3 schools every year for the next 10 years, and that wouldn't meet the demand. When we're not quite in that ballpark, and hopefully, you know, we don't get there because it'll exceed our ability to house students. I mean, there are some school districts looking right now at double shifting secondary schools because they don't have enough room in schools. So there'll be a morning shift and an afternoon, evening kind of shift for secondary, just because that's how they can't physically contain them in a building.
And just on the same topic, I'm looking at the graph for Prince Charles, and it goes pretty steep up in comparison to Margaret Sanderson and its projected enrollment. Would that be because of the development that's happening then up in the McKee
Yes.
area there, right?
Yeah.
So, I'd say that's, even though it kind of looks like there's lots of capacity there, it is something that, and it's not just the board that's looking at it, that we have staff. What's the young lady's name?
Kelly Glasnow,
Yeah,
or Kelly
that's
Churchill.
very experienced, right? And they just scrub all this demographic data and so on. Not to say we couldn't do better and investigate more, but I know they look at it very thoroughly. And I anticipate that's why this looks like the decision is like it is, because maybe there's not another option for all that peak development that's going to happen.
And so if you look at Prince Charles, even if the Stennerson lines are well over capacity in 25, 26, 27, 28, if they were well over that capacity line, the solution would likely not be to make a boundary review, a boundary change, and accommodate the students at Prince Charles. It might mean you put portables on Stennerson. It might mean you force transfer students to Prince Charles, but you wouldn't likely make, in my estimation, a boundary review, because you know that in 2032 and those years that follow, as the McKee Peaks development takes off, is you're going to be over capacity at Prince Charles. And then you'll have just changed. That's why you won't change the boundary, because you'll know you have to change it back. But in that time frame, you'll have created a student who started kindergarten, and now you're going to say, well, we don't have room for you in next year. You got to go back to, and then you go into grandfathering provisions for students when you actually change boundaries, and you create all kinds of other issues. So it looks like there's capacity at Prince Charles, but it soon won't be. And the planning horizon is longer than what we even show on some of the graphs. Anything else online? Anything on the secondary one? I know there's often been discussion over the split catchment at Stennerson. And when you look at the map, it makes such good sense to split the catchment. But from that sense that these are all my friends and we have to both go different ways, it's just creates that issue. But when you look at where the schools are, sometimes if you could move the school to a better spot, you'd have fixed a lot of those little issues. But
there's quite a lot of congestion, I think, at drop-off time and so on at Robert Bateman, right? Like that's quite a tricky area to get into,
yeah.
I think.
As is Stennerson.
Yes.
Yeah, as is.
Yeah.
I give you a list of schools.
Yeah. What is our plan for Yale, though? I mean, this is quite soon going to be quite over capacity, right?
Yale's on the capital plan too for addition.
Yes.
Yeah. The ministry's got a new program in the capital side to expedite additions. So they're looking at not portables, but they're looking at more modular construction. So you can go from design to occupancy in a much shorter time frame. So not 24 or 30 months, but you can have design and occupancy within, say, 16 or 18 months. So that would be, and even potentially within a 12-month kind of time frame. So we'll see. I mean, they're working on that right now, and how that will work in a number of districts. Just this past week or last week, I think Surrey and Kelowna and a number of districts were approved for some of these modular constructions, which is cheaper. It's less costly because you're not doing the same level of design, because you've got a modular building that's built and here are the specifications, and then the timeline to get them built. And I don't think there's a way to overbuild right at this moment in time, in the lower mainland particularly. Okay, the High Street Village one, again, this is a development. You can see the phase 1 and phase 2 plans that are in that development. Our yield rates are a little bit different. And this one, we only estimate that we'll have about 35 elementary students that will populate our schools. So when you look at the Blue Jay, Harry Sayers, and Dave Candle boundaries, you can see on this map, and the circled area is the area that we're talking about, and it really is dealing with the Blue Jay and Dave Candle catchments. The circles in here are 1 kilometer circles, and you can see that the review area is basically the same distance from Blue Jay and Candle, so they're very similar in terms of proximity to the students or to the school. So, and this one is a very simple move as well. There's currently no students residing in the review area. If we wait much longer to approve the boundary review, there may be students living in the review area. And in fact, there may be now even. I'm not 100% sure. You see the boundary right now runs along Cardinal Avenue. The proposal is to move it to just north of the High Street Mall. And so that everything in that shaded area would become part of the Dave Candle catchment. So this is the enrollment capacity of both of those schools. You can see Dave Candle's quite a bit under capacity. Blue Jays, and has been for a long time, over its functional capacity. And in this area of the community as well, when the board does look at the demographic information, you'll see that the participation rate in the school. So we have population information of students. So we know there's 600 students in the Blue Jay catchment, and we have 400 of them going to Blue Jay, and there's 200 that in our books we call them unaccounted for, but they may just simply be in independent schools. So we see that throughout the entire city, and all the catchments we have that factor. We've seen that factor in this area of the city for sure. And Blue Jay I say that because Blue Jay would likely be even a little bit more over capacity if we had a higher participation rate. But there is room at Candle, and the proximity and locations make Candle the reasonable choice to consider the shift of this boundary to go to Dave Candle. So any questions on that one?
Yeah, makes sense. Can't put it in Blue Jay.
Anything online, Tracy?
Nothing.
Boundary reviews are so easy when there's not a whole bunch of people that live on one side of the boundary and we're moving it to the other side. Like, we're not moving it from the front of your house to the back of your house. It's way easier to do it when there's nobody living there. It's not always possible, but it is much easier. So there's a couple of things. All of the feedback, including the questions that we've had tonight, we'd appreciate if people pose them on our engagement site. So some of that information has been sent home to schools. So the engage.abbeyschools.ca will give you the opportunity to answer some questions related to both reviews. Both are different projects, if you will, on the engagement site. So I encourage people to provide information through that. All of the information, the staff reports that were presented to the board, this information will be available on that site as well. So if you have questions, you can look there. You can also email at info@abbeyschools.ca for any other questions you have. So if you don't want to go to the engagement site and you want to ask a question about the boundary review or give a comment, you can choose that as well. Both will work. We will close the feedback. I think it's close to the end of November. And then have something back to the board. And depending on the volume of feedback, the report might go to the board in December and it might go in January. So it'll be dependent upon the information that we get. And then the board will make a decision at some point, either December or January, or in their schedule that they feel appropriate to make the boundary change. So any other questions? Excellent.
Maybe there'll be more coming in the future, right, once people have a chance to digest, right?
Well, we had a lot of questions when we looked at the Eagle Mountain boundary, because we had 3 or 4 different options. You could go to, you're currently going to this school, but you could, if we move the boundary here, then your new school might be Eagle Mountain, or you could, and then we had a number of those factors, because we actually did have to eat into a number of catchments to create the Eagle Mountain boundary. So that's why we were able to take all the portables off Mountain Elementary. We looked at, a number of factors like that, but yeah. In this case, it's like say,
It's not really impacting anybody.
No.
As you said, there aren't people living there now, so it's helpful, less complex, right?
and Kelly has reached out, our manager of capital planning, to developers to let them know before that this was going to be under consideration. So the boundary line was being proposed to be where it would be. So it's not a complete shock, even to the developers. So just try to give people a heads up, so it's not just takes them by surprise kind of thing.
Yeah, for me, the takeaway today, I think, was just to make sure that when we look at demographic information, we're looking at the OCP and we're anticipating questions like this, like are there detached houses being bought by a single developer perhaps that might impact our demographic studies. I'd be surprised if they weren't looking at that already, but that would be a question to ask.
Yeah, the demographic information we have is pretty fulsome. And it gets to be, there's so many factors to consider. And most of these things move pretty slow in terms of shifting enrollment patterns, and it's not often it happens really quickly, although I will say that in some of these districts that they've seen huge growth based on immigration. I just don't know even if our community has got capacity for that level of immigration. Like I think the ministry told me if there's 10,000 people that move in, that generates about 1,200 students for the schools. So if your population is generally increasing by X, you'd see approximately about a 1,200 student population increase. In our case, that would translate, because when we look at our general population, there's a percentage, we have the highest percentage of independent schools I think in a school district in the province. So we would see a chunk of those based on our information, and we would apply a general factor. So we would get 1,050 instead of 1,200, because we would say, well, 150 are going to choose an independent school for a variety of reasons. So that's just one of the factors we've always had to deal with, is our participation rates. And because we know the populations in the school catchment, and some of the times, some of the fears we even have are, well, if they ever left their independent school and came back to us, we would be in a predicament. So we've often had a really good relationships with our independent schools, because they serve a purpose in this community to help balance all the enrollments that we have. So
Here's one more question. Is there a point where an elementary school is just too big and you have to build a new school? Like, is there a number where the district is just like, we can't have 800 kids in an elementary school?
that's a great question.
Like, the gym at Stennerson doesn't even hold the current student body. They have to do assemblies half and half. And nothing's being done about that. Like, the library's not big enough for them. Like, there's, they're adding these classrooms, but the playground's not getting improved. The gym's not getting improved.
Is the superintendent
School of 500 plus students.
is the superintendent still online? Did you hear that question, Superintendent Nosek?
Can you repeat that?
I'll ask, because I've got the speaker right here, a microphone right here. The question was about, when is an elementary school too large? Like Stennerson's over 500. At what point will an elementary school become too big to be an elementary school? And you could say the same thing for our middle schools. Our middle schools were designed specifically to be 600. Is 900 too big?
Yeah, it's hard, and it's hard to give a really clear answer. I mean, I'm certainly familiar with elementary schools that are, you know, larger than 700 in some cases in the Fraser Valley.
And not that we want to compare to the US, but they've got schools that are just enormous.
But like, they're doing this addition to Stennerson, they're taking up a ton of space. They've already taken half the playground equipment out of use while they're waiting for this to happen. I don't know where they're gonna put it when they're done, and then if it ends up with another 4 portables in 5 years, because there's just so many students, they'll have nowhere to play. Like, we're talking
Yeah.
about adding hundreds of students to a playground that's already too small.
Yeah. Well, I mean, then we're starting to look at designs, and I don't think we see it in Abbotsford. We're more rural, but you go to Burnaby and Vancouver, where they're building schools down in the middle of a metropolitan urban environment, and the playground may be on the roof of the school. And there's different kinds of solutions to some of those things, but those are not totally out of the realm of possibility. I don't think here. It's not what we've seen, but I know that in our previous long-range facility plan discussions, as we look at some replacement schools, so we've got Godson, for example, on our replacement list, that building needs to be replaced. And we're pretty certain that when time comes to replace that building, it won't be a single floor sprawling elementary school. It will be a multi-floor, multi-use building that has a school embedded into it. So
I think it's quite fair to say that, especially for younger children, right, it's a more intimate experience when a school is smaller, right, and it's not so vast and so on, and facilities are there for them. I'm just wondering, like, what would you do if we wanted to split, say, Stennerson as an example, into 2 schools? Well, then you have now a boundary change that we'd have to go through, where every family would be impacted in that school, because, and then, maybe a kid's friend is in one school and on another, and that creates, all those problems associated with the boundary change. So it would have its own set of difficulties, I guess, yeah. But certainly a smaller school is nicer for elementary school kids, right?
Yeah, especially when there isn't, like I said, the gym is way too small for what they have already. The
Yeah.
playground's too small already. The drop-off situation is already a nightmare. So add another 200 students to it and a daycare. It's
I know.
Yeah, for comments.
I know.
Do you have a magic wand?
No, but even our new school, it's built in such a constrained site. If you've driven around there when it's busy, it's at the top of a hill and around a corner. It's got an 88 space childcare facility. When that's built, when that's full of students, it's going to be a very busy place.
I haven't looked at the Cooper Farm development plans for a while, but is there any plans for walking trails for children to walk from there to the school? Don't know.
I don't.
Another park space, yeah, maybe through the park space.
Very, very often what happens with developments is the developer will be required by the city to build in infrastructure to support that sort of thing. So I'd be surprised if those discussions haven't taken place.
Yeah, one of the streets does go through it. To those, the 3 streets.
It's going, yeah, they're going to need kids, but.
Yeah, so it's not at all uncommon for a developer to have to expand a sidewalk, for example, or put street lighting in, or, some of those things along with their development permit.
Yeah. Well, and if we actually got the details of that, which I think we probably have, there's going to be McKee Road's going to be extended. It's going to come right through there. There's, on the north side of that, to get to Stennerson, it would look to me that there should be some ways that, there's not some immediate ways to get to Stenderson, but if you can get there from this street here, if you can walk over here this way, then I would say that these are likely going to punch through, right, into here somehow.
No, they're not doing that. The only one that's going through is Pearl.
Yeah, they're not going through, but they will likely come in through, because if you look at, here's what we have for the phase 1 picture of what it might look like. So here's McKee Road down here. It's unconstructed at this point. But it looks like this road has to go somewhere.
It goes to Somerset is that street. And
Right.
It's going to be fire access, like emergency access.
Okay.
So it will be a road, it will be access for fire trucks if they need it. Is what the last plan I saw was. The only street going through was, I think, Pearl Avenue.
I mean, often a fire access can be used to walk on, I think.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right? But I guess point taken, like maybe the question could be how does one advocate for proper routes for children to get to the school on a development like that? It probably the city goes through some kind of a first reading, second reading, third reading process for development where the community can engage with that development.
Yeah, I was at that meeting too.
And they didn't talk about that?
Not really.
No,
No,
yeah.
people asked about the school specifically, and all they said was there would be an addition to the school, so that was kind of the answer, but.
And that's great, but I agree with Trustee Roush that sometimes and we've got existing schools that have got even walkways from a residential area to a school, but they're not necessarily walkways in November that you're going to have your child walk home from school in the almost dark rain, because they can be isolated kind of. They're not like walking down the front street where there's access to people's homes and things in an emergency. You don't really want to go down some dark path in behind all treed in a park area as an elementary school student, or maybe any student. So I think that safe walkways, because then what we run into is a request for transportation when there isn't a safe walkway. So we need to construct some of these safe walk paths to school, because people can live very close to the building and go, for me to get there safely, I've got to go this way to stay on a sidewalk or something. And so I think there is for sure. And if you go into the engagement portal, please note that, so that I've made a note, but so that we don't forget.
Access to the development.
I don't see it if that's.
One access to get in and out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe we were told that McKee extension wasn't going to necessarily happen at the same time as that development. Because it goes over Highway 11, which is provincial, so then there's a whole issue with that getting done, which I don't know if that would have access to the school anyway. I feel like it's more.
Yeah, that's why I'm certain it says McKee Road unconstructed on this plan. And this is a sketch. So I'm not gonna get too excited because all we have is a sketch, not quite a finalized plan, so.
But make your voice heard, and if there's other families that have that same, because the developer will pay DCCs as well, development cost charges, which are big numbers, right? And that's all paid to the city. And the idea with those numbers are to develop infrastructure, right? Whether it's underground sewers, traffic lights, walkways, right? Lighting on walkways, all those things. But most of that is driven by the community voicing their desires, right? So
when I moved into where I live, my kids started kindergarten, I immediately called the city to build a sidewalk because there was no sidewalks on the streets.
Yeah.
And everybody parks on my street to walk their kids, but we're all walking in the middle of the road. So they need to make sure that that's it.
Yeah.
Apparently the city of Abbotsford has an app now where you can go on there and you can actually make comments like that. Sort of a streamlined way, like anything, there's a light that needs delayed light or something like that, or a walkway or light.
Okay,
Good.
thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us online, everyone.